So, what's a good story? What's a bad story? And what is a story anyway? I hope you will forgive me if I just struggle with you a little bit. I'm not interested in being a theorist who answers all of those questions in just a 3 or 4 minute video, but I want to grapple with these ideas with you and confess to you that I'm really more interested in being a storyteller and a story helper in the church than I am in being a story theorist. But I've been thinking about stories for a while, and I want you to join me in your own thinking about stories this semester. So let's grapple with it a bit. Here's a definition that I struggled with. I started out with a definition from the founder of the Moth radio show, which is a show about storytelling and is a show of storytelling. And then I passed that founder's definition on to a student, Shelby Vandermolen, and Shelby struggled with it a bit herself, and I did some refinements, and this is what we came up with. A story narrates the details of characters struggling against great obstacles toward an important goal. A story narrates the details of characters struggling against great obstacles toward an important goal. Let's unpack that just a little bit. A story narrates, typically there is a storyteller, and sometimes the narrator disappears a little bit more. In most of the Bible stories, the storyteller disappears or sort of behind the story. In many contemporary stories, the narrator is much more important. The personality of the narrator is present in the storytelling. There are details of the character's struggle that are narrated, and that word details to me means that there are specific events that happen and they represent struggling, which is more than one attempt in the process of trying to overcome the goal. The details of characters struggling. Shelby and I struggled about whether that should be a character or characters. Different storytelling forms focus more or less on a main character, but I would say probably the vast majority of stories have a main character. There's one person that the audience wants to know, who's this story about? Struggling against great obstacles. Of course, the greater the obstacles, at least to the character, him or herself, the more empathy we have with that character's attempt to achieve their goal. So typically we have a character like Luke Skywalker, this young warrior who doesn't even know he's a warrior yet. He doesn't have a whole lot of skill, and he has to come up against Darth Vader and the Empire and the Death Star and all these soldiers of the Empire in their white suits. So lots and lots of significant obstacles. We have young David against the giant man of war in all his armor, Goliath. Great obstacles make great empathy in the audience as they follow the main character. And of course, then finally, an important goal. If it's not an important goal, if the characters are just fighting over a candy bar, then we want to say, look, quit whining, I'll buy you a candy bar. But if it's a life or death struggle, if this goal is to save someone's life or to save someone's love, then we certainly can get emotionally invested in that story. Now, a little bit about what makes, or more about what makes good stories. Stories carry their meaning in a whole series of events. You have to get the whole story to get the meaning of the story. And we're interested not just in what happened, but how it happened. In fact, we often know the end of the story. We at least can predict, or we expect that the story will end in a certain way. But we're so fascinated to see how the character gets from the beginning of the story through the middle portion of the story and then finally to the end of the story. Surprise is important, but I want to suggest to you that surprising the audience is not the most important thing. It's the character's surprise that is so very important to us. Finally, a story doesn't tell me everything. It allows me to go on a journey. It allows me to bring the meaning, or to unravel the meaning of the story. I'm not told what a story means. I see the story, I see the events of the story, and then I get to come to my own understanding of the meaning of the story as I reflect on the story. We see this in the Gospels. The the disciples come to Jesus and they say, well, what did that story mean? He has to explain it to them. He says, if you have ears to hear, then you will hear. He understood the power of a great storyteller in leaving the meaning to the audience. And this is so crucial to us in our storytelling within the church, because in the church we want to leap to the end of the story. We want to leap to the meaning of the story. We want to justify the fact that this story is part of a worship service by providing the moral of the story and not letting the audience, well, we forget that so much of the power of storytelling is allowing the audience the time, the emotional and mental space to come to their own realization. That's what this means. So let's get to some stories. Open your books to the beginning and the very end. You'll read a chapter called Stories Carry Hope, which gives you a little piece of the Joseph and Mary story, and then go all the way to the end of the book, to the appendix, and read a dramatized version of the story of the fisherman's wife.